that I had never seen before, that are really seems to be quite striking. But what the Pythian Club was formed in what was called the Institute for Colored Youth, which had been established during the Civil War and continued after the Civil War. And Cato was a teacher, very aggressive guy from everything I read. He wanted to be the superintendent, the big dog, but they made him the principal instead. Let's see, we'll go on to the next one. Here's a little more about the Pythians. Cato saw his baseball club as a way of achieving equality. If he could match his all-black team against an all-white team and come out victorious, or even compete, it would be another step towards racial equality in the day. Well, in 1867, the Pythians applied for membership to the Pennsylvania chapter of the National Association of Baseball Players. I don't know too much about that association, except that there were 265 applications. One was denied. So you get the feeling of what's happening at that time. But in 1869, they were able to negotiate a game with an all-black or all-white team called the Olympic Baseball Club, an all-white team that dated back to 1830. They have a drawing of their little clubhouse from 1830 even. So they were not only a white club, but a well-established one. Well, the score didn't work out too well for the Pythians, 44-23. Now those numbers aren't unusual for this time because they literally pitched like horseshoe pitching, not like we see today. So there was a lot of run scoring that we don't see now. The Philadelphia Inquirer recorded this observation of the game: black players acquitted themselves in a very creditable manner. So all was not lost. They went on to play several teams, traveled to Washington to play a team called the Washington Alerts. Now, as we go through this, the nicknames that they gave to the black baseball teams are full of different sort of flamboyant things, like the Alerts, like they played the Sleepies or something for the... But anyway, the Washington Alerts had at third base a young guy named Charles Douglas, Frederick's third son. So I have visions of Frederick in a lawn chair, pulled up there, watching the game. It was played somewhere between the Capitol and the Washington Monument on the open fields of the time. Now this Octavius Cato was a real enthused, I suppose would be an understatement, but he was an activist as well as a ball player. He had organized black volunteer troops in the Union Army, and there he is in his army garb. He had actively desegregated the Philadelphia trolley system post-Civil War. But after black males were granted the vote, and the first election was being held in October of 1871, he was hustling to support black voters because there was a lot of turmoil. They thought they might call out the National Guard, of which he was a member. And on the way, he was shot and killed. A martyr of sorts for the cause as well as for baseball. That was the end of the Pythias Baseball Club. I keep forgetting. My next character in this series of stories is John Bud Fowler. He went by the name Bud because he called everybody Bud. Hey, Bud, how you doing, Bud? So they called him Bud. That was what happened. His name was not Fowler. He was born John W. Jepsen Jr. and went to school in Cooperstown, New York, where his father was a barber, John Sr. Speculation is that he changed his name to avoid embarrassing his family, because professional baseball wasn't a very honored profession at that time. So he changed his name and kept it throughout his playing years. The photo is of Bud Fowler, second base, with the Findlay, Ohio baseball club. It was an 1891 photo, so it was doctored up a bit just with the color and so forth. But it singled him out, and that's the reason I selected that. Bud was the first black professional baseball player. The game was played May 17th, 1878. I think it was in Lynn, Massachusetts. It could have been in London, Ontario, but I'm pretty sure it was Lynn. The Lynn pitcher was bummed up, and so they recruited Bud and a couple other players from the Chelsea amateur team and paid them, so he became the first professional baseball player, black professional baseball player. He went on to play for 25 teams, 10 seasons. Now you can do the math. That's over 2 a season, pretty close, 2.5 a season. Different clubs. And that was more than any black player before 1950. And that would have been after people got into the major leagues and had been around some. Here's Bud in Keokuk, Iowa. Well, there's a little bit of an Iowa thread to all the stuff I pick up here. But you can see, there's Bud. The only black out of 12, I counted 12, didn't I? 5, 10 players. But he got very favorable press. A good ball player, a hard worker, a genius on the ball field, intelligent, gentlemanly in his conduct, and deserving of the good opinion entertained for him by baseball admirers here. Unfortunately, they only played 8 games and then went defunct for financial reasons. But there's a little backstory here that I'm going to tell why you can look at this. The year before, he played for a team in Stillwater, Minnesota. And he also worked at the Hadley Barber Shop at the same time as a backup profession, I guess. Anyhow, the Stillwater team is having a tough year. They lost 15 games in a row. So they called on Bud to pitch the 16th game. And lo and behold, they won. The fans were so grateful, they gave him $10, which is about $275 in today's money, and a new suit of clothes. But that team, too, folded shortly thereafter. I mean, if you only win 1 out of 16, I guess things don't look too good. Bud was not always well received in Iowa, however. He finished his career in 1890 with the Burlington team. But in that same year, he filed a lawsuit against the Ballingall Hotel in the Tumley. Anybody ever been to the Ballingall Hotel? You know it? Okay. Anyway, he filed a suit for refusing to serve him in the dining room. I don't know how the suit turned out, but hats off to Bud for making that part. Towards the end of that year, in 1885, he went from Keokuk to St. Joseph, Missouri, played a few games there, on to Denver, Colorado. when in Denver, a publication from Philadelphia, I don't know how they got all this, they must have had stringers out in Denver. In December of 1885, there's a quote here that sort of summarizes the way Bud was doing at that time. Fowler, the crack-colored second baseman, is still in Denver, Colorado, disengaged. The poor fellow's skin is against him. With his splendid abilities, he would long ago have been on some good club had his color been white instead of black. He stuck around Denver that winter, and he got involved in racing, walk racing, and he ran a race. And walk racing, he got a time, I forgot, 8 minutes and something for the mile. A very good time. There he is, Bud just called. He also raced against a roller skater and defeated him for a mile. So figure that this guy was creative. He, let's go on one more. Here's a series of quotes from newspapers in the 1880s that give you some idea of what he was up against. He was up against teammates who objected to playing with a black player. He was up against the opposition and tried to spike him. He was injured by a ball striking him in the mouth. They also tried to strike him while at bat. And in Binghamton, the players refused to go on the field unless Fowler was removed. And the Sporting News in 1889 said that Fowler knew that every player that came down to second base would throw the spikes into him. About half the pitchers try to hit these colored players when at bat. So it wasn't a pleasant life, for sure. Now, what I have selected here are shin guards for catchers. But what Bud did is he invented shin guards that he put under his uniform on his legs to prevent the spikes from hurting him. Not a kind of a clever guy in many ways. Later on, he met let's see, who is this guy? What's this guy's name? Those of you who are in farming and ranching will know that woven wire fence in the late 19th century was a big deal. It's a new invention. Not sure that Page came up with it. J. Wallace Page of the J. Wallace Page Woven Wire Fence Company, Adrian, Michigan. Anyway, Bud hooked up with Page. Page thought it was a marketing device to have a baseball team, an all-black team, and this is how they traveled. They traveled in this railroad car with sleeping accommodations. And there's the cook. They had a full-time cook. He caught a couple games, they tell me. He had 12 players. He handpicked them. One account said they were about half of them college educated, which kind of stretches my credibility here because not very many ball players of any stripe were college educated at the time. But anyway, handpicked them for character, good behavior. He didn't want any bad things to happen. In 1896, they were what were called Barnstormers. You know what I mean when I say Barnstormers? Okay. Went from town to town, played the game. They won 118 and lost 36, 2 ties. And they played at Cedar Rapids. I found a clipping that had a notice that the game was in Cedar Rapids. Now, a second sponsor, in addition to Page, was called the Monarch Bicycle Company. They gave each player a bike, 12 bikes. And when they roll into town in their car, their railroad car, they get on the bikes and pedal downtown and advertise the game. Try to get more fans that way. Now, Bud had another team that did somewhat the same thing on bicycles, except they were dressed in formal attire. For some reason, Well, the reason was this. He challenged any team that he would play in this attire if they wanted him to, for a certain fee. Obviously, they were in it for the money. So, but in 1896, in the middle of this big winning streak, Bud left the team. The pull of playing against white players was so strong that he went back to Michigan, played for an Adrian, Michigan mixed or white team in a professional league. And that was, in fact, the last, or number 25 of his 25 teams that he played for. Well, here we go. The Algona Brownies, ever hear of them? Anybody else here? They, I know Jim has looked into this quite a bit. This is a 1902 photo, and I do think it's a mixed team at that time, mixed black and white, and I have a feeling that is a white player, and the rest might be black. They how did all these black players get out into Kossuth County in the first decade of the 20th century? Well, it was an economic issue. At least 3 of these players played for the Page Fence Barnstormers. And from there, from that Page team, they went to Chicago. And there were 2 black teams in Chicago, 2 very good black teams in Chicago at the time, in 1901. But they didn't pay their men. So whoever it was from Algona stepped in, offered them a little more money, and they came out for a summer in Algona. You probably wouldn't even, I don't suppose the Iowa Chamber of Commerce would crow about a summer in Algona these days, but anyway, that's how they got there. And the 03 team was all black and very good. They crowned themselves the colored champions of the West. But they did play a series, and this is kind of interesting. They played a Chicago team, and they played the first game in Chicago, and they lost 3-2 in 10 innings. Then the next one in Arnold's Park. Why not? Huh? Have a little lake fun. Kossuth County Fairgrounds and Des Moines, where that's the series that they played to claim the championship. They also played a series with a team from Winnipeg. And in one of those games up in St. Paul, the pitcher for the Brownies hit the batter from Winnipeg with the ball. Now, who knows? Those things happen, the ball slips. Sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. Well, the St. Paul gendarmes rounded up the pitcher, put him in the clink overnight. They released him the next day because they had no grounds for keeping him, but you know what some of the motives might have been. Well, on we go. Moses Fleetwood Walker. This is the Oberlin College baseball team, 1881. These are my next sort of black hero here. And this is their first baseball team. Now, not only here is Fleet, they call him, and I'm going to call him that for the rest of my life. Here's his brother, Weldy. Let's see, what is Weldy's full name? Weldy Wilberforce Walker. Now, if I am not mistaken, and some of you can help me with this maybe, Wilberforce and Fleetwood, I think, are names from the abolitionists, the pre-Civil War abolitionists. Does it sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Good, thank you. In 1881, in the summer, for a summer job between Oberlin, and, oh, I'm sorry, he studied law at Michigan. Well, now, this is the early evidence of what we're up against in the Big Ten. Oberlin played their last game of the year at Michigan, at Ann Arbor. And the Ann Arbor coach recruited Fleet for the next year. It started way back then. Okay, anyhow, Fleet never got a degree from either of those institutions, and some people say it had great grades, some said it was average grades, so we just don't know. At least I don't know. His claim was to be the first African American to play on a major league team. This came about with sort of an unusual circumstance. He played for the Toledo Blue Stockings, who were at the time professional, but not in the major leagues, in 1883. But Toledo was taken into the major leagues in '84, so when he played on May 1st as a catcher, he became the first black player in the major leagues. Now, I'm going back a year here. The Toledo Blue Stockings, in order to make money, had an exhibition game with the Chicago White Stockings of the day. Some of you are anticipating the punchline here, but that's okay. The captain or manager of the White Stockings was Adrian Cap Anson, the Marshalltown infant, first born white child in Marshall County. But he was a big, blustery guy who became somewhat famous for his racial attitudes. And when Fleet stepped on the field, there was, Cap lost it. He really got upset and said he would not play if there was a black man on the field. I mean, he used other language, I'm sure, but, well, the manager of the Toledo team had not intended to play Fleet that day because he was hurt. Catchers got hurt a lot in those days. They had no protection whatsoever. So this manager said, Fleet, you're in the lineup. And Cap said, he's not playing. The manager says, you're not getting your money. I changed my mind, says Cap. So they played. And this is going to be the first cameo appearance by our friend Cap. Let's go on. In, I believe it was 1917, Tony Mullane, they called him the Irishman because he was born in Ireland, the Irish ball player. He was a pitcher that could pitch with both his right and his left hand. Not often with his left hand, but he did on some occasion. When he got a sore right arm, he pitched with his left hand. He was a notorious, I'm talking about Tony now, a notorious contract breaker. He would sign with a club, get a better offer from another club, and take off. So he didn't have a lot of friends in the league, and he wound up playing with Fleet. Fleet was the catcher, Mullane was the pitcher, and this is a quote he made in 30 years later. Mullane says, Walker was best catcher I ever worked with, but I disliked the Negro. He goes, and Walker, when they were playing, Mullane crossed him up, threw a fastball when he had called for a curve, for example, which is not easy living for a catcher, for sure. Anyway, Walker, having crossed him, went out to Mullane and he says, I'll catch you without signals, but I won't catch you if you're going to cross me when I give signals. So they agreed they would go without signals. And they pitched, they served as a battery for the rest of the year. on we march. Here's Fleet again. This is a photo of 1988. I think it was 88, maybe 89. He was in Syracuse. We'll come back to that. But he formed a battery, this time with a pitcher named George Stovey, a left-handed pitcher. You can see him over there. Very, very good. And again, our friend Cat comes on the scene and refuses to play the Newark team these two are playing for because they're black. And this time, the manager has to withdraw the players. Neither Stovey nor Fleet played that day. But coincidentally, on the very same day, the International League, which is the league that Newark was in at the time, declares it will not approve black player contracts. In effect, this drew the color line. And of course, we had Plessy versus Ferguson a few years later that sort of solidified a lot of that sort of thing. Well, here's Fleet's legacy, I call it. Here is a playbill. They got it wrong because Fleetwood is actually his name. It's not his nickname. The Trial of Moses Fleetwood Walker. And there on video you can get some of the drama in it. The reason it is so interesting to dramatists is this. Fleet was in Syracuse. You saw the uniform. And after the team disbanded for financial reasons again, one evening he is going out and is accosted by a whole group of whites. They throw rocks, they call him names. According to accounts, he reaches in his pocket for a knife, thrusts it into the crowd, and turns out he hit somebody, and the person died. The man died, it wasn't. He was called into court and charged with second-degree murder. But the drama is, he called character witnesses and pleaded self-defense. And a jury of 12 white people acquitted him. The drama of building up to the acquittal makes for good theater, I would suppose. He also invented something. He ran a movie house and hotel back in Ohio and patented some mechanisms to put the reels on and get them set up. I'm not sure what it was at all. There are drawings of what he submitted for the patent. But in let's see, what was the date of this? 2008. He published this treatise, Our Home Colony, a treatise on the past, present, and future of the Negro race in America. And these are a couple quotes from it. The Negro should be taught he is an alien. We believe that the Negro can find superior advantages and better opportunities in Africa. He was, in a sense, an early radical black nationalist. Now remember, he studied law at Michigan, and he went to Oberlin. So people who've looked at this said it is what am I going to say, an academic type thing, but very bitter. So that's what Fleet left us. Now we go on to 1890, well, actually we're going to 1901. Charlie Grant played for the, and this is his, a couple of photos, fielding a ground ball. He was a second baseman, and there's a photo of him. He played for the Page Fence Giants, and then one spring he went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and he worked in a hotel as some of the wait staff or something. And McGraw, John McGraw, who was a very famous manager of the Baltimore team at this time, brought his team to the hotel and heard about Charlie, and so he took him out on the grounds and hit him some ground balls and pitched him. Liked what he saw, what he was taught. So the solution for John McGraw is to call him a Cherokee Indian and give him this wacko name of Tokahama. Well, the other teams in the league kind of smelled a rat in this thing and exposed it, and Charlie never got to play in the National League, the accepted National League at the time. But here's the Cedar Rapids Republican of the day said, but for his colored blood, Grant would have been in the National League 4 or 5 years ago. Now we move on. Oh, there's my one. Oh, I had several photographs, but this one turned out. Now, Lucy, you can help me with my photography, I'm sure, but you get the idea that Rube Foster was a big man. How big he was? Some said 6'4", some said 5'10", some said 240, some said 200 pounds. But we'll take their word for it, he was big. He grew up in Texas, and he left school in Texas after the 8th grade to play baseball. His father was a minister, and they had several children. Now here's what I thought was a tragic story. 4 of Rube's siblings died of tuberculosis. And Rube said, if it hadn't been for playing baseball, I probably would too. But he was away from the home playing ball. But he didn't leave Texas unarmed. I think things haven't really changed much, I guess, in Texas. But anyhow, he was never seen without his Texas pistol. He went to the Chicago area first, then up into Michigan, and then back. And early in his career, he was pretty cocky. Foster thought he knew more than anyone else. This is a fellow player, now I'm quoting. But by 1903, the brashness was gone, the confidence was retained, and he was the best pitcher in black baseball at that time. So here he is. I don't think it's 6'4", do you? But anyhow, that's our man Rube. Incidentally, he got the nickname because he defeated in a head-to-head matchup the best-known pitcher of the early 20th century, Rube Waddell. So his friends called him Rube because he defeated Rube. In 1906, the Philadelphia Giants were crowned. I don't know if crown's the right word, but anyway, they were world's colored champions. The owner, who's pictured here, is a white man. He was a reporter, a sports reporter for one of the Philadelphia papers, and he issued a challenge to the World Series winner, which happened that year to be the Chicago White Sox. But there was no response. Oh, we're not surprised, I suppose, are we? But this story continues a little bit. Rube was upset with the way this sports writer was running the team. He said, we got $175 for the whole team, 12 or 14 players, for one game on Sunday, the best day of the week to make money. How can that be? Well, apparently, the owner just didn't want to negotiate. The people that held the cards were the owners of the stadiums. And so Rube was fed up. He went to Chicago, started his own team, negotiated with the same stadium people, and he got it up to $400 a game. And later on, it was a 50-50 split. He was a tough negotiator. Maybe he still had that pistol, who knows. But he was instrumental in putting black baseball on good economic standing. And as a consequence, well, I would add one other thing that we're beginning to see here in the first decade of the century. Something called the Negro style of playing the game, which carried over to 1947 when Jackie Robinson first entered the National League. It was a lot of speed, a lot of base running, a lot of base stealing, and contact hitting. And Rube taught that. He was a manager as well as a player. He taught that. And so he was very instrumental in this style of play, which is so much fun to watch. And so it got so as a kid, when blacks were beginning to play in the National League and American League, you thought every black that came in was fast, though they really weren't. It was a stereotype that we learned early about them, and it came from this way of playing as much as anything. Oh, there's a clever story. The manager of this team was Solomon White. Sol became the first black historian of black baseball later on, but he was on this team, and there's a story that goes in a 1904 game with a team called the X-Giants. Now figure that one out, I don't know what that means. Anyway, a big burly catcher for the X-Giants runs to first base and knocks the ball from Sol's hand. And the guy keeps going towards second. Sol picks up the ball and chases after him, threatening him with all sorts of mayhem. The guy turns around, holds up his fist, and Sol tags him out. Sometimes using your head is better. With all his organizational skills, Rube organized the Negro National League in 1920 at the Kansas City YMCA. He had three things in mind, three improvements on black baseball at the time. One is a dependable schedule. By having a league, you can, and they had 8 teams, 7 cities, two teams in Chicago. You could schedule regular games. You could intersperse exhibitions for extra money if you wanted, but you had a known schedule at the outset. Second thing, it would, by agreement, stop teams from raiding other teams, from taking players from another team by just offering them more money or something else to play for you. And the third thing is that players would get regular pay. An important thing. Now, I don't think I mentioned that our hero here, Rube, was he was the son of a minister, but he had this Puritan ethic in him. He didn't drink, but he believed in helping people out. When other teams in the league, and he had one of them, he had one of the Chicago teams. When other teams couldn't meet payroll, he would take money from his team, give it to that team so the players got their money. So there was more than a pistol in his weaponry. Well, here's sort of the ending of the Rube Foster thing. I kind of like that little saying. Here's a photo of him back when he was pitching, and you do get the idea he was a pretty good-sized guy. A pitcher, a manager, an owner, a league president, he earned the tag of Father of Negro Baseball. Now, you have been remiss in not oohing and ahhing about my t-shirt, but I'll tell you anyway. This is the Negro National League members who are in the Cooperstown Hall of Fame. And there they is, all of them. And Rube is one. And the next two that I talk about also are in there. And curiously, in Kansas City, where Jim and I visited this museum, they have another kind of, it isn't Hall of Fame, but it's about 20 different selected people who were critical in the history of black baseball. And they include Octavius Catto, Fleet Walker, and Bud Fowler. So we pretty much hit the high points, it seems to me, on those things. You can come up and ooh and out at the later on. The only woman in the Cooperstown Hall of Fame, Effa Manley, co-owner with her husband Abe of the Newark Eagles from 1935 to 1948. This is a book cover over, where are we? Yeah, over here. The most famous woman in baseball. And that's Abe and Effa at their wedding. They met, of course, at Yankee Stadium at a World Series game. And I think it was 32. And it was a second marriage for both of them. And Abe was a numbers runner. As a matter of fact, most of the owners of the Negro National League were numbers runners. And that was a gambling affair where for very little money, people could, it's sort of, it's been legalized now in the form of lotto and that sort of thing. It's the same kind of thing. You pay $1 or $2, in those days a dime, and you take a long, long chance that you'll win a lot of money. He was a numbers runner, and it was illegal. And when Jackie Robinson got into the major leagues and had an article in, Life or someplace, he wrote some scathing things about the Negro National League, one of which it was run by crooks. And Effa was incensed and shot back that he was ungrateful. That was her major comeback. Let's see, we gotta get further down the line here. Actually, Abe was a little older than Effa by 13 years, as a matter of fact. And that might make a difference in how we interpret the rest of this, I don't know. She was a hands-on owner, and this is a nice shot of her and one of the players for the Newark Eagles. She liked to show off her team to her girlfriends. She would round up someone, they'd get box seats, best seats in the stadium. And then she would instruct the manager of the Newark Eagles to pitch her favorite player, who was a big show-off in the first place. So she, hands-on, I'm not sure. She told the manager which one to play. Effa was involved in all the front office stuff at first. Buying equipment, arranging travel, housing, that sort of thing. Later, she became the spokesperson for the team. And she would go to the league meetings, only woman, and read out those other guys something terrible, with good points. She said, "You're fools. You're fools. You're being played for fools. The catch in your income, your bottom line, your business model here, is those booking agents that book you into the major league stadium," because they played in major league stadiums for the most part. They played in Comiskey Park in Chicago, Yankee Stadium in New York, and Forbes Field in Pittsburgh, and so forth, Washington. She said, what you have to do is book yourself. Get your own booking agents. They didn't listen to her particularly well, but they did make some progress on some of these things. not only was she a business savvy, she was also a crusader. That's the word they use in her Hall of Fame plaque that you're seeing. For example, she led a picket line in Harlem department stores. Don't buy where you can't work, and was able to get jobs for black men and women, I presume mostly women. And the one that really got my attention is at the Newark ballpark. You know, they have beer night and so forth up at Cedar Rapids, and they've always had ladies' night and so forth. She had a stop lynching night at the Newark ballpark. She was very involved in a lot of, what should I say, social justice campaigns of the time. Now we go to a name you probably are familiar with, Leroy Satchel Paige. And this photo is what a batter sees. His feet way up in the air. And can you spot the ball? It's pretty tough, isn't it? It's hidden in his glove in this case, but it also is hidden by his foot some of the time. So he had deception, and it's pretty much agreed upon that he was threw the fastest pitches of any pitcher. There's some quarrel about some of the very early Walter Johnson and the like, but Bud Fowler conceded, Dizzy Dean conceded, and a lot of batters in the major leagues conceded that Satchel threw the ball faster than any other human being, which is a part of his success. But he started out life on, you might say, the wrong foot. He later on said it wasn't the wrong foot, but he got caught for petty thievery when he was, 12. And he was sent off to a school called the Alabama Reformed School for Juvenile Negro Lawbreakers. Somehow, they're associated with the philosophy of Booker T. Washington. How? I never did figure out, but they're supposedly take these lawbreakers and make them into good citizens. Well, Satch, by his own autobiographies and other interviews, would agree with that. That's what happened to him. He left there. He had a chance to pitch and learn baseball in the school. And he came out, and he tried out for a team. This is in Mobile, Alabama. I didn't give you that context. He tried out for a team in Mobile for which his older brother was playing. And he was pitching to the manager, who was sizing him up to see if he was going to be good enough. And the manager said, "Do you throw that fast consistently?" And Satch says, "No, sir. I do it all the time." So at that time, he was 6'3.5" and weighed like 130 pounds. He was really, really slender. He never did get much above 165 pounds, from what I could gather. But Satch never saw a contract that he didn't feel he could break, and he was a master of this. But now think of this. If you're holding as your ace card the fastest fastball in the world, and arguably the best control, that is, you could put that fastball where you wanted it, wouldn't you go to the highest bidder? You bet. When you don't have any other, you probably don't have any other equity that you can count on. That was his equity. And he used it and made some really interesting history. And I can only give you a very small portion of the stuff that he did. Here's one that was really stood out in some ways. I told you he jumped contracts a lot. there was a car dealer in Bismarck, North Dakota. His name was Churchill. Bismarck, North Dakota. They had a baseball rival with Jamestown that this car dealer was really invested in. So he put out the call to black players to come for his team. And he got Satch. And he got a guy named Double Duty Ratcliffe. And he got a catcher named Quincy Troop. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. T-R-O-U-P-E. Maybe Troupe, I'm not sure. And an infielder whose name escapes me now. And they all went up to Bismarck, played on this semi-pro team for the summer. Satch took his girlfriend. She got sick of it and went home. You can imagine why. She did eventually marry him. Well, she was married. I'm sorry, it wasn't his girlfriend, it was his wife. And she went back to Pittsburgh. It was hard to find housing in Bismarck. Anybody would take in 3 or 4 black males. It was hard. Another interesting thing, the ball games. Well, Bismarck, I'm told, is near Sioux, we used to call them Indian reservations. And the Sioux would come to the ball games, sit in the bleachers. And their nickname for Satch was Long Rifle. I kind of like that. Anyway, this quote is from Double Duty Ratcliffe. The language isn't what we use today, but I think it gets the point across. Double Duty, this is Double Duty. Double Duty and Satch are niggers, but they're big league niggers, and we can't beat them. He was quoting what their opposition would say. They went to Wichita, Kansas, played in a semi-pro tournament, won 7 games in a row. One of them against Shawnee, Oklahoma, all Native American team. But anyway, it's fascinating, the stuff you get into. I can go on and on about these sort of things. I skipped over some things. Okay. I'm going to go back a year to 1934. Now, in the blurb for this, I put in about how Satch pitched a game in Cleveland in the morning, got in his car and drove to Chicago and pitched an evening game. He loved to drive. He also loved to hunt and fish. He had other hobbies. This is a story about him getting in his car in Pittsburgh and driving all night to Yankee Stadium in New York. And he falls asleep in the car, and he's sound asleep in the morning, and they're looking all over for Satch. They send the bat boy out to the parking lot, because they knew he was going to drive, to the parking lot. He's going, "You, Mr. Page? You, Mr. Page?" Finally, the kid found Satch, and he woke him up and got him in there. It turns out that was a special game. There were, I wrote down how many? 27,000 fans, I think, in Yankee Stadium. Not a bad draw even then. Especially in the, this is 1934, in the height of the Depression. So it's this special rivalry with this other young black pitcher who's sort of threatening Satch's domination of the baseball world. And they played to a 1-1 tie. And the darkness took over and they had to call the game. They had another game scheduled a month or so later. And in that game, it's tied 1-1. Bottom of the 9th, Satch is pitching. A player for the other team gets on base. Another one walks. He intentionally walks. The third. Bases loaded. Tie game. 1-1. Nobody out. So I guess one man. Next guy bats, he gets the high heat. 3 straight strikes, and he's out. Doesn't even swing at it. Probably too fast. Then a pinch hitter comes in with something of a reputation. I don't know about him, but anyway. He swung and missed 3 times, and the game finished with a tie. This was, people thought it was a trick, but it really wasn't. It was Satch's savvy that he decided who he wanted to pitch to and under what circumstances, and he did it. This is fast forward to 1948. The man on crutches is Bill Veeck. H isn't here, is he? Oh, it's too bad. HD and I met him in the Wrigley Field bleachers in 1985, I think it was. Amazing guy, he's so friendly. He just doesn't, nothing pretentious at all about it. But he owned the Cleveland Ball Club in 1948. And Satch was really bummed out about the fact that Jackie Robinson was the first, Larry Doby was the second black in the major leagues, and Larry Doby was taken by the Indians. And so through Abe Saperstein, who ran the Harlem Globetrotters for years, through that contact, Satch got in touch with Bill Veeck, and he says, "When can I come? When can I come?" And Bill says, "Just wait, just be patient." And the time came in the middle of the 1948 season. And they were in a pennant race, which turned out on the last day to be tied with the Boston Red Sox. But anyhow, they were in a hot pennant race. Veeck says to his manager, Lou Boudreau, "Come on out to the field. I've got a new prospect. I think he can help our ball club." So Lou comes out, and Bill says, "Throw a few to him, Satch." And of course he whizzes in that really good fast. It may not have been as fast as it was in his prime, but it's pretty fast. And then he says, "Grab a bat, Lou, and see what you can do with it." 10 pitches from Satch. And Lou Boudreau was the most valuable player in the American League in 1948. At that time, his batting average was nearly 400, which is amazing. Lou Boudreau grabbed a bat and walked up to the plate. 10 pitches. He never hit a fair ball. They were all strikes. He never hit it. "I think he can help us," says Lou. And he did. He was Rookie of the Year in 1948 for the Cleveland Indians. And they went to the World Series. They won the playoff game with the Red Sox. And so Satch was the first black pitcher in the major leagues and the first black pitcher in the World Series, which made him feel very, very good. Now, a year or so later, Veeck sells the Indians. He buys this godforsaken ball club in St. Louis called the Browns in 1951. And first call he makes is to Satch, who's now in his high 40s, age-wise. And so Satch comes to St. Louis and pitches for him, and this is the story of the cat. Look at how, it's not exact, I couldn't match Satch's, but it's from that era. It's the St. Louis Browns. And let me close with what it seems to me would rank up with the Greek philosophers for good advice for living. Work like you don't need the money. Love like you've never been hurt. And dance like nobody's watching. That's it.